I love the works of Terry Pratchett. I've talked about this before on my channel, but for my money, there has never been a kinder and more empathetic writer in the world of literature than Sir Terry. He was the best of us. Terry Pratchett had a greater grasp on what makes a human human than any other writer or artist I think I've ever seen. And he distilled all of that understanding, all of that curiosity, all of that wisdom into an enormous fantasy world that existed to produce allegories and discussions and jokes and metaphors for the world around us, our politics, our religion, our philosophies, our social dynamics, everything. Terry Pratchett created a lively, strange, dark, magical, mysterious, surreal, exciting, thrilling, beautiful world that was like a playground for him to explore all of his feelings, his thoughts, his ideas about us. About people. When you pick up a Discworld book, you're picking up an allegory. You're picking up a story full of characters in a world where all of those things exist to offer up a discussion, an idea, a philosophy about who we are and how we behave, and maybe even why we behave in those ways. Terry Pratchett was a satirist, and his satire was expansive. But the thing about satirists is that they don't punch down. The point of satire is to punch up. When a satirist has a grievance with something in society, they look up at the people in charge. A government, a religious institution, a corporate CEO, a person or group of people who are making things worse for everyone else. Satire is about holding the people in charge accountable for the terrible things they do to all the rest of us. And Pratchett did that in the most dynamic ways. Rather than through newspaper cartoons or sketch comedy TV, his satire was a three-dimensional fantasy world. And the beauty of that was that it allowed him to tackle these elements from so many different angles. And the thing that kind of stitches all of this together is that Pratchett clearly had an issue with the concept of status quo. Terry Pratchett took umbrage with tradition, with conservatism, with things just being the way they are because that's how they are, that's how they've always been. It's pretty obvious when reading his books that he didn't like that as an answer, as a reason for living and behaving the way that we do. And so his books are so often about traditions. They're about religion. They're about economics. And when he tackles all of those different themes, all of those different political things, it feels like injustice is the driving force of all of it. Take, for example, a fantastic quote from this book, Men at Arms. This is the second book in the City Watch series. I just got through reading it, and there's a wonderful moment pretty early in the book where the captain of the City Watch, Sam Vimes, presents us with his own theory of socioeconomics. And in true Pratchett fashion, it's presented as an example, a metaphor. Something easy to understand and digest, and it goes like this. The reason that the rich were so rich, Vimes reasoned, was because they managed to spend less money. Take Boots, for example. He earned $38 a month plus allowances. A really good pair of leather boots cost $50, but an affordable pair of boots, which was sort of okay for a season or two, and then leaked like hell when the cardboard gave out, cost about $10. Those were the kind of boots Vimes always bought, and wore until the soles were so thin he could tell where he was in Ankh-Morpork on a foggy night by the feel of the cobbles. But the thing was that good boots lasted for years and years. A man who could afford $50 had a pair of boots that'd still be keeping his feet dry in 10 years' time, while the poor man who could only afford cheap boots would have spent $100 on boots in the same time and would still have wet feet. It's so good. That is a protagonist taking a page to talk about economic injustice between the rich and the poor, the ways in which society and capitalism and politics and economics are all designed to treat some people better than others, injustice. That's at the heart of Terry's storytelling. And then you have Good Omens, a book that he co-authored with Neil Gaiman and which I am currently re-listening to in audiobook. Good Omens is a book that isn't satisfied with how Christianity has set out its message about good versus evil, heaven and hell, stories of right and wrong. And this is because a human is gonna human. The book over and over talks about infallibility and ineffability. Ineffability? Ineffableness? Things that are ineffable. And then there's people, and the fact that our two protagonists, an angel and a demon, see the world in so many more shades of grey than the other creatures of heaven and hell because they've been around people. Early in the book they discuss how heaven and hell don't have any good theatre, how there is no good art in either of those places, how the mind-numbing boredom offered by heaven is just as bad as the excitement offered by hell. This book treats its readers over and over again to tiny little philosophical nuggets about how heaven and hell fail us, about how the idea of God and the devil just doesn't measure up to the human mind and the human experience. And the thing about that is that it isn't just about satire, but it's also about curiosity. The most intelligent of us are curious people. Being intelligent doesn't mean knowing more than other people. It usually means being more curious, wondering more, asking more questions, exploring more, talking to people, reading books, being curious, having an open mind. Curiosity was clearly very important to Sir Terry Pratchett. And that curiosity doesn't just come through in his satire and his metaphors and his allegories, but also in his world building. Because for the majority of his career, everything was set within this one fantasy world that he had created. But that fantasy world is constantly expanding. All the way through 40 books, you learn more about this world, and so do the characters in it. Because Terry Pratchett was curious about what he could do, let alone what else was out there. What else was in this world? The world continued to grow because of his imagination and his curiosity. He wanted more answers. And his curiosity about human behavior and our world and the corruption in it, the good bits, the bad bits, all of it, that led him to expand the Discworld as a mirror to our world. It's pretty obvious that when he had more questions and ideas and conversations he wanted to have about our world, he would expand the Discworld to encompass that. Later in the series, he wrote a book called Monstrous Regiment, which contains an out-and-out transgender allegory. While he had dealt with feminism before, women's rights, the traditions of gender roles and gender dynamics, an out-and-out trans allegory had never been done, so he did it. This was clearly something he was curious about, wanted to think about, wanted to explore, and so he did it. This is something that happened over and over again in these books. You're watching his curiosity about life, about the world, and about us expand through the expansion of the Discworld. There is a magic and a majesty to these books. Books about policing, books about religious traditions and institutions, books about gender roles and feminism, and books about death itself. The genius of Terry Pratchett came in his satire and his curiosity, his eagerness and willingness to hold power to account and explore injustice through his stories, and his eagerness to better understand and communicate his understanding of human behavior through the world and characters that he created. And at the heart of all of that, as I said at the very beginning, is kindness. Terry Pratchett was kind to himself. He was kind to the people around him. He was kind to his characters in his world. He clearly thought humanity was a beautiful thing. In all of the good and all of the bad, there's beauty, there's art, there's the ability to learn and grow, the ability to create and change, and the ability to surprise people. I think that's something really beautiful. The fact that so many of the stories in the Discworld are about tradition and flipping expectations on their head. That's why there's nothing cruel in these stories. His jokes, his satire, they never punch down, as I said, and they're also about subverting roles. He didn't like tradition, and so he took what was traditional and he flipped it. He asked questions about it. He was curious about it. He wondered what would happen if you subverted these things. And usually what happened was fucking hilarious. There is a limitless beauty and magic to everything that Terry Pratchett ever touched. The Discworld was a boundlessly exciting place. And it still is, and it always will be. Terry Pratchett was all about kindness and curiosity, and he built an entire world to explore that. This probably won't be the last time I talk about Terry Pratchett. He was such a good man. I haven't read all the Discworld books. Every few months I read one I've never read before, and I'm reminded over and over again of the genius of Terry Pratchett. I don't know what I'd do without his books. I really don't. So go read them if you never have. Go read one you've never read before. If you've read them all, great. There's so much to reread. And subscribe for books.